As you drive along many of Berrien County's roads, some paved but mostly dirt, you may not realize you are passing through one of Berrien County's ghost towns. Few have any physical remains of the once thriving community, but they are ghost towns just the same. They once had 50 or 100 residents, a commercial establishment or two, a school, a church, and sometimes a cemetery. Several had a post office or a telegraph, many a flag stop on one of the 4 railroad lines crossing through the county. But usually something happened in the lives of these residents, or in their business fortunes, or in the world around them, and slowly their history was left behind and soon forgotten. Oh, the names are still there, in part or whole: Allendale, Lois, Glory, Bannockburn, Gladys, Weber, Connell, Rowtown, Baker Sawmill, and others. Each has its own story to tell, so come on along with me and visit a few ghost towns of Berrien. We will start our journey to a couple of old Berrien communities that are now in Cook County, Greggs and Heartpine. If you ever make a drive over to Thomasville on Highway 76, or even just to Barney for a peach ice cream delight at Burton Orchards, you will surely pass by the remains of the village called Greggs. As you travel west from Nashville through Adel, Highway 76 makes a hard left turn heading south out of town. About 4 miles further, you will come to the crossroads called Pine Valley, known by the older natives as Milepost 4. A quarter mile further, the South Georgia Railway tracks cross over the highway and off into the woods to the west. About a mile or so further, and the first hint of the once thriving community comes into view with the warning sign of Greggs Road departing to the right. After turning onto Greggs Road and traveling west just a short distance, you will have another encounter with the South Georgia Railway tracks. The relation between the village of Greggs to the South Georgia Railway is more than a common crossroad. Had it not been for the South Georgia Railway, Greggs may never have been established. About 1894, 2 brothers, James W. and Zenas W. Oglesby, lumbermen from Buchanan, Georgia, heard about the vast, untouched virgin forests in South Georgia. They moved their pine sawmill operation to Heartpine, Georgia, 3 miles south of Adel on the new Georgia Southern and Florida Railway. Here they established the Oglesby Lumber and Manufacturing Company. They bought large tracts of timberland, mostly to the south toward Quitman. In order to transport the timber to the mill, they created over 25 miles of tram roads, including a 5-mile line in the southwesterly direction toward Little River, with its terminus near the Greggs community. The company built section houses and equipment buildings at the crossing of the tracks and Greggs Road, where many of their loggers and workers at the mill were housed. It is likely some of these structures were later used as tenant houses for Greggs plantation owners. In 1894, James W. Oglesby applied to the United States Postal Office to establish a post office in his sawmill community at Heartpine, 3 miles south of Adel, halfway to Cecil. Therein he stated that Heartpine had 150 residents and the post office would serve 350. His application showed exactly where the sawmill community was located. It was on the east side of the existing Georgia Southern and Florida Railway tracks, in the southwest corner of Land Lot 420 of the 9th District, almost exactly between Adel and Cecil. The post office was located between the tracks and the Adel to Cecil Road. He stated the post office would be within 40 feet of the Georgia, Southern, and Florida tracks, but 3 years later it was moved back 300 feet closer to the Adel-Cecil Road. In order to reach their expanded timber resources, the Oglesby brothers decided to extend the tram line with permanent rails 23 miles to Quitman. In January 1896, Quitman citizens accepted a proposal by the Oglesbys in which they would put up half the cost of a railroad between Quitman and Heartpine if local businessmen and investors would put up the other half. On February 2, 1897, the first passenger train by the Oglesby Railroad, known as South Georgia Railway, arrived at Quitman from Heartpine. The March 1897 timetable showed that the train ran once daily in each direction, except Saturdays were only first class. There was no train on Sundays. But it is interesting that the table showed the stop at Gregg's was listed as Garnett. In May of 1897, Lucius M. Wingate, a 35-year-old widower from Colquitt County living with his nephew, opened a mercantile store just a few yards west from the South Georgia Railway tracks in Gregg's. He applied to the U.S. Postmaster for a post office there, stating that it would serve the population of 800 people, which was probably a great exaggeration. The application had inquired whether there was a village there, wherein he stated that though he called the post office location as Gregg's, a new train station called Garnett had been established there. Not that there was a depot there or even a loading platform. On the May 1901 map, Garnett was listed as the station and Gregg's was listed as the post office. However, by 1903, Garnett had been dropped from the railroad maps and Gregg's was listed as the established name. By 1902, the South Georgia Railway had extended its tracks from Quitman to Greenville, Florida, but a warning sign on the future of Heartpine was revealed when the Heartpine Post Office closed its doors in 1902 on account of not being able to get anyone to serve as postmaster. Sure enough, in 1904, after the company had harvested most of the timber south of Heartpine, the Oglesbys closed the Heartpine mill and moved their full operation to Quitman. No longer needing the connection to the Heartpine mill, the brothers pulled up the rails from Gregg's to Heartpine and placed them 4 miles north from Gregg's to Adel, Adel being the terminus. In spite of Lucius Wingate's optimistic projections of Gregg's population growth, the 1906 Rand McNally Pocket Map and Shipping Guide states that Gregg's had a population of just 56, but may not have included the population of the surrounding countryside. By comparison, in 1906, Heartpine was still listed as a station with telegraph and Southern Express service, and claiming a population of 112. Though the population of Gregg's failed to live up to Wingate's expectations, the 1908 Hudgens Company map shows a turpentine operation run by Bingard and Harver. Certainly, other turpentine operations had been active in the area since 1890. These stills were the predecessors of the sawmills that clear-cut the timber whose lifeblood resin had been drained by the turpentiners. There were at least 2 small sawmills in Greggs, besides the Oglesby Mill in Heartpine. The 1908 Hudgens Company map of Berrien County shows the town site of Greggs, with Lucius M. Wingate's store, Methodist Church, Baptist Church, and the Greggs School all identified. Also noted on the map are the homes of Folsom, Bennett, Flowers, Wingate, and Whitehurst families. Daniel and Rebecca Fender Whitehurst and their 11 children made their home in the Greggs community. So many Whitehursts that Whitehurstville may have been a more accurate name for the village. From the marriages of those 11 children were born 62 grandchildren. James Martin Whitehurst, the eldest son of Daniel, built this home in 1905 for his wife Eva and their family. That same year, the 8th of his 9 children, Hazel Lucille Whitehurst, was born. From her memories of living a lifetime in Greggs, Hazel drew a map locating several of the structures within the small township in the 1920s and 30s. Most of the structures she identified are no longer standing, and only a few photos of their existence remain, like this fine image of the Greggs schoolhouse, or this image of the Hamp Wingate store shortly before it was demolished to make room for the widening and paving of Greggs Road. There are still a few pre-1930 residences that have survived the ages. The Tom Bennett home on Shirtliff Road is a small cottage with a screened-in porch. Though it was owned by Tom Bennett in the 1930s and 40s, the original owner may have been E.B. Milton and his wife, Willie. Further south on Shiflett Road is the George and Vannie Shiflett home, still with hints of its early history, though it was completely refurbished by a recent remodeling. Adjacent to the Greggs Road Railroad crossing is another Shiflett home. This 1920s craftsman-style home belonged to Edgar L. and Edith Shiflett. Edgar operated a mercantile in the 1920s. It has also been recently refurbished. Both communities provided education for their children. The Greggs School District was established in 1905, though several schools operated in Greggs before that. As early as 1901, L.O. Fender was listed as a teacher at one of the schools in Greggs. Though the formal creation of a school district did not occur in Heartpine until November of 1910, it is likely some form of education was being offered earlier there as well. Greggs School operated until it closed in April of 1931. Heartpine remained open until April of 1928. Though the terminus of the South Georgia Railway was moved to Adel in 1904, Heartpine still operated a station stop on the Georgia Southern and Florida line until 1913. However, thereafter it was not listed on the railroad maps or the Georgia Southern and Florida timetables, and Heartpine disappeared into history. Today, the town and mill site are accessible on Highway 41 at Fawcett Road. Though the unincorporated town site sat on the east side of the tracks, the sawmill is believed to have been on the west side of the tracks. Heartpine Pond is just south of the sawmill, and may or may not have had enough water to be of any value to the mill. Heartpine town site remained accessible from Greggs through the remnants of pre-1904 South Georgia Railroad bed until the interstate was opened in the late 1950s. But with the access closed, the final separation of Greggs and Heartpine was set in concrete. There is one small section of the old railroad bed that can be accessed off of the M.J. Taylor Road just south of the city landfill. A dirt two-track road enters from the east. This is the old railroad bed from Heartpine. The bed crossed over the M.J. Taylor Road and disappears 100 yards or so on the west side. The remainder of the old bed is lost in cultivation. However, there are definite indications of the route of the bed on a satellite view. From the crossing of M.J. Taylor Road, it likely continued southwesterly, crossing over Morrison Creek, then turned more westerly until it crossed the old Quitman Road. Then it curved southwesterly across the old Union Road, just below Tyrone McDaniel's property, and continued its curve across the New Life Baptist Church and Highway 76. As the bed curved across the New Life Church property and Highway 76, it connected with today's South Georgia tracks on the north bank of Wells Mill Creek, north of Greggs. Today, the only event that is common to Greggs and Old Heartpine is the sounds of the Norfolk Southern train horn as it crosses Fawcett Road at Old Heartpine and the crossing at Greggs Road, the sounds of history that once was. As we depart Greggs and approach the stop sign at Highway 76, you may wish to turn right and head on over to Burton Orchards for a peach ice cream cone. Or you can come on along with me for another visit to one more Ghost Towns of Berrien. We will follow Highway 76 all the way back over through Nashville and heading towards East Berrien, still on Highway 76. About 5 miles out from the old courthouse on the square, you'll come upon a small sign that reads Weber, population 25. The Weber community could easily have been called Gaskinsville, as almost all the residents were Gaskins, or kin to the Gaskins, or worked for the Gaskins. Most of the land was owned by John A. Gaskins. The 1908 Berrien County land map shows John A. owning over 10,000 acres in the 10th district. The first naming of the area was Montague, probably given to the operators of the turpentine distillery that was located about 1/4 mile to the north of Weber off of Highway 76. However, in 1896, there were no railroad lines even reaching into that section of the longleaf piney woods and the naval store's operations. With the nearest post office being in Nashville or Willacoochee, in 1898, William V. Nix applied for a post office to serve that rural section of the county known today as Weber. W.V. Nix was the next-door neighbor to David and Harmon Gaskins, brothers of John A. In Nix's application, he stated that it would serve about 200 people and would be located 1 mile east of 5 Mile Creek, near the intersection of today's Giddens Road and Highway 76. Nix proposed the name of the post office to be Hill, named in honor of the memory of Joel Hill, whose widow, Rosanna Hill, resided in the location. Rosanna was the daughter of Andrew J. Hodges and Amanda Rowan. Joel and Rosanna had married in January of that same year, but some unfortunate event occurred which took the life of young Hill, leaving his widowed wife and her 4 children from a previous relationship. With the booming need of the naval stores operations in the county, in 1903, railroad magnate B.B. Gray of Pine Bloom, owner of the Osceola, Pine Bloom, and Valdosta Railroad, placed a cheap tram rail from Willacoochee Crossing to near Hill Post Office, naming the station Garrett's. In February 1904, this news item appeared in the Nashville Herald. Big timber deal at Nashville. Barfield and Brewer of Unadilla, Dooley County closed a lumber deal here yesterday with Mr. John A. Gaskins for 3,400 acres of round timber, consideration of $34,000. The body of the timber lies 4 miles east of Nashville on the OP&V Railroad. Only the sawmill privilege was sold. John R. Barfield says his firm will be here on the 1st of December to erect a large sawmill and will make Nashville their headquarters. Just 1 year later, in 1905, B.B. Gray sold his tracks to the Douglas, Augusta, and Gulf Railroad, but by 1907, wealthy financier J. Skelton Williams had acquired ownership of the line. Williams combined the line with 3 other short line railroads to form the Georgia and Florida Railway. How long the Barfield and Brewer sawmill was in operation is not known, but at least on the 1909 railroad map, Barfield was listed as one of the railroad flag stops. Hill Post Office was last listed in 1907. But it was not until 1910 that the new Georgia and Florida Railroad stop was finally given the name of Weber for some unknown reason. It was a flag stop without a permanent depot, only stopping to pick up passengers or load of freight when a flag was posted. The owner of most of Weber was John A. Gaskins. Gaskins had 7 children, 6 boys and a girl, but perhaps the most astute and progressive of them all was his next to his youngest son, J. Henry Gaskins. J. Henry Gaskins was born in 1890 and attended elementary school for 7 years at the 5 Mile School in Poplar Springs community. He attended 2 years of high school in Nashville before attending Georgia Normal College and Business Institute in Douglas, Georgia. He graduated with honors in 1909, returning immediately to the farm life back on the John A. Gaskins plantation. In July 1910, J. Henry married Hattie Robertson, and they immediately started their family with the birth of a daughter, Edith. Then another daughter, Ruth, who died a year later. Then another daughter, Ethel. Then another daughter, Hattie Mae. This sequence of births was not promising for the needs of a young farmer. Then there was a boy, John Henry, but he died as an infant. Then in 1918, they were blessed with the birth of a healthy son, Roberson. Then another daughter, Rhoda. With the birth of their baby boy, Walter, in 1922, J. Henry and Hattie Gaskins had a full family and a full home. 800 acres of the Gaskins plantation were under cultivation, and it was impossible for the Gaskin family alone to tend. J. Henry divided up the plantation into smaller farms, each producing a specific crop. He hired sharecropper tenants to oversee each farm. He had as many as 19 different tenant farmers working for him at one time. He provided housing for each of the farmer's family, required that they have their own gardens for food and hogs for meat. Access to milk cows was also provided. The tenants were allowed to hunt for game and fish on his land, but they had to share their success with J. Henry. This arrangement seemed suitable to most of his tenants, as many of them stayed on the property for more than 20 years. One of the earliest and longest employed sharecropper was Bud Baldry. Bud started working for J. Henry in 1918 and was still working for him in the 1940s. The turpentining and sawmill boom, along with the Gaskins farms, had brought not only the railroad to the Gaskins community, but the workers' families as well. J. Henry recalled the distances he had to travel to get his education and felt there was a need for a local school to educate the children of the community. So in 1915, he donated the land and materials to build a one-room public schoolhouse. J. Henry, Harmon Gaskins, Tom Carter, and Big George Sermons, a well-known carpenter, provided most of the labor as well. The original structure was well built, and as a credit to their workmanship, the school still remains today, though several feet lower in height than it was in 1915. J. Henry was an influential spokesman for the Georgia farmers as a whole. He served as state representative and senator during the Governor Eugene Talmadge administration in the 1920s through the 1940s, always striving to legislate for the advantage of the South Georgia farmers and their families. By 1939, the center of activity in the Weber area was the operation of the Henderson Turpentine Still, located on the north end adjacent to the Georgia and Florida Railroad tracks. The still was operated by Walter R. Henderson and Son. In October 1952, Walter R. Henderson was shot and killed by Abraham Pinckney, a black employee at the still, when Henderson tried to take the gun away from Pinckney after the employee had already shot and killed his wife and stepdaughter. In 1948, Highway 76 was paved, and the new highway bypassed the first Gaskins store that John A. and J. Henry had established in the 1920s. So J. Henry built the more familiar block store on the corner of Highway 76 and J. Henry Gaskins Road. It later was occupied by J. Henry's son, Walter, who operated a barbecue establishment and whose name is still emblazoned on the canopy gable. In 1964, J. Henry suffered a severe stroke and reduced his ability to speak for over a year, even his wife's name. However, he did recover, with the exception of a speech impediment. Finally, after living a full and fruitful life, the Gaskins couple passed away, Hattie in 1971, followed by J. Henry in 1979. They are buried at the Harmon Gaskin Cemetery in Weber. Today, the Weber community primarily consists of the area just north of the Georgia and Florida Railroad tracks on Robertson Gaskins Road, then south of the tracks across Highway 76 and down today's J. Henry Gaskins Road to Radio Station Road. On the north side of the tracks, on the west side of the Robertson Gaskins Road, was the location of the late 1800s Montague turpentine operation. No structures or remnants exist there today. A few hundred yards further north, on the east side of the road, is the home of Thomas Gaskins, brother of John A., originally a log structure, then later covered with clapboard. But today's renovated structure gives only a hint of its historical origins. However, the adjacent barn is still reflective of the period in which it was built. Back to the east of the track crossing is the location of the black quarters of the Gaskin field hands and turpentine workers. The updated Weber sign still marks the location of the first flag stop of the Georgia and Florida Railroad, though it no longer picks up passengers or freight. Crossing back over Highway 76, the prominent landmark of Walt's Barbecue welcomes us down the historical trail now known as J. Henry Gaskin's Road. Still melancholy reminders of their namesakes who have long passed on. Across the road on the west side is the well-preserved home and outbuildings of Frank and Mary Baldry Giddens. The well still prominently positioned and looks as if it could be used today. Frank was a longtime resident and fishing partner with J. Henry. After passing a couple of well-maintained contemporary homes and continue south 100 yards or so, you'll come to the intersection of the Gaskin School Road on the left. This is the only part of the original dirt road that passed through Weber. Just to the right of this intersection is the last remnants of the first J. Henry Gaskin store. Immediately behind the store was the home of Wild Bill Day, one of the most colorful residents of Weber and Berrien County. He was always dressed in overalls and a straw hat, and had an opinion on everything. His favorite mode of travel was his mule. The cabin, the mule, and Wild Bill Day are all long gone. Take a brief tour to the left on Gaskin School Road, and you will come to the old Gaskin School, looking sturdy enough to welcome another school year. Just beyond the school is Harmon Gaskin's family cemetery, final resting place of many Gaskin's family pioneers. A little further on the left, partially hidden by weeds and underbrush, is the deteriorating home of Bud Baldry, the longest-running tenant of the J. Henry Gaskin's communal farm plan. Double back on the J. Henry Gaskin's Road heading south, you'll be passing the banks of the Gum Pond, which looks to be the perfect place for Mr. Smith to live while carrying on a secret relationship with a woman other than his wife, which in fact it was. Names are not revealed to protect the innocent. After passing the Gum Pond, you will come to the sturdy remains of the J. Henry Gaskin's tobacco barn. J. Henry claimed to be one of the first farmers to put in a tobacco crop in Berrien County. One can only imagine how many crops of tobacco were cured in this barn. After passing the tobacco barn, you will pass the sites of the John C. Maynard home and the J. R. Gaskin's home, neither of which are still standing. Just as the road takes a hard right turn, you see the sturdy structure of the Gaskin's commissary, once operated by three sons of John A. Gaskins, William, Lucius, and J. Henry. It was operated in conjunction with the Gaskin's turpentine still. However, the still and the commissary business were not successful, and both went bust about 1910. Just to the left of the commissary, and about 200 yards or so at the back of the property, stands the John A. Gaskin's home. It was moved to the back of the property adjacent to the creek pond when the J. Henry Gaskin's home was built. It is said that it was the birthplace of J. Henry Gaskin's. If you were to continue down the lane in front of the commissary, you would have been on the J. Henry Gaskin's farm and home site. A mayhaw orchard is on the right, and the home once stood on the left. However, The fine two-story home burned to the ground about 2013, and access to the property is not permitted. Across the road from the J. Henry Gaskins farm was the home of the builder of many Weber structures, Big George Sermons, and once the home of Robertson Gaskins family. However, the home is no longer standing. As the road makes the next hard bend to the right, you will see a gated two-path road leading into the palmettos and pines. This is the location of the Sam Watson home place. Here, he and his second wife, Betsy Boykin, raised their 4 children. The home is still standing, though not viewable from the road, and it is private property. Finally, we reach the last structure of note on the J. Henry Gaskins Road. It's a small cottage and tobacco barn that sits close to the road. It's hard to believe that it was once the home of a tenant farmer, Cola Ray, and his wife Eula Taylor, and their 3 children, Hazel, Maudine, and Lavon Bud Ray. As I travel back up the road to Highway 76, it's hard to imagine how things have changed so much since the early years when John A. and J. Henry Gaskins first started their new concept of community tenant farming. So much has already disappeared or is in the process of doing so. I am sure they are as grateful as I am that their children and grandchildren have taken the time over the years to preserve a written and photographic history of this special place. I wish I could linger longer here, but I hope you will join me soon again when we discover another Ghost Towns of Berrien.